hype for The Promised Neverland was at its peak back in the early months of this year, I didn't exactly avoid it, but the thing about me is that when a show is being hyped up so much, I normally steer clear of the wave until the ocean has calmed down a bit. And this show was no exception. I found out fairly quickly that the genre seemed to be right up my alley, however, because media that begins seeming lighthearted but very quickly does a complete 180 thematically is probably one of my favourite things. For example, Madoka Magica is one of my favourite shows of all time. Doki Doki Literature Club was the game I thoroughly enjoyed. I love stuff that subverts my expectations. And The Promised Neverland certainly did deliver on that front. Well, to an extent. There were a lot of twists and turns, and I would argue in some cases a few too many, and a few that didn't really pay off too well in my opinion. And although I didn't know too much going in, I knew, judging by the reactions of fans who were actively watching it at the time, that it might turn into one of those shows that rips your heart out and stomps on it mercilessly. Even though I'd managed to steer clear of spoilers, I knew something was wrong with this picture-perfect image, and I knew that this cute cast of characters were doomed to suffer a horrible fate. But what it was, I wasn't quite prepared for, if I'm being honest. For this video, I'm going to be focusing on the anime adaptation alone. Anything I criticise is based pretty much solely on the show. I've not read the manga yet, and I might consider doing so. Many fans seem to be of the opinion that the manga is better than the anime, which isn't exactly a new way of thinking. I mean, you usually get that with any form of book or comic being adapted for the screen. But one of the major criticisms seems to be that they changed a few things in the anime that didn't make sense in the context of the world or the characters. But like I said, this isn't going to be a review of the manga. No promises, but I might do one of those manga versus anime videos in the future. Who knows? One more thing, there's very little about this show I can talk about without spoiling it, so if you haven't seen it yet and are planning to, please be wary that I talk about a number of major plot elements here. Go and watch it first, it'll help with knowing the context more than anything else. Let's talk about the intro. The visuals are really interesting. I like that filter they use, giving it that yellow glow and high saturation, and I've always been a fan of that effect where they make it look like a quickly panning camera. There's some definite symbolism sprinkled in, with the butterfly losing its wings, and of course the flowers blooming red. The usage of the flowers I still don't quite understand as a plot device though. I like the art style. The kids are moe as hell, with big bright eyes and colourful hair, as well as very expressive. They could go from soft looking and adorable to extremely sinister. It never seems out of place, which can be difficult to pull off sometimes. Some anime can't have their adorable cast make faces that are too over the top for fear of making them look ugly. Or on the reverse, they can take it to an extreme and make them very ugly, so there's a nice balance here. All I would say is some of the character designs fall into the cliche. For example, you can usually tell what personality type they're going to be on appearance alone, but that's something pretty much every anime is guilty of. The soundtrack is very atmospheric and varied with the genres of music they use. The use of string instruments and piano in the tense scenes is eerie and gives either a somber or frankly terrifying mood to the scene, with the drum beat and wind instruments used in a completely different way in the scenes that are meant to be upbeat and happy. There are even some parts of the soundtrack that sound like jazz, some with an accompaniment of a cappella. There wasn't a song in this soundtrack that I didn't like. If the soundtrack is good, then that's definitely going to help me like a show a lot more. However, I have to say the intro song Touch Off is a slightly different story. When I first heard it, I was rather taken aback because I got the impression that this would be the sort of anime that'd have a classical intro. Maybe a big band orchestral piece or something like the vibe the Major Bride's first intro gives off. Still, despite the unexpected contrast to my expectations, the intro made me hype, and later on when I found out this was an action dark fantasy thriller with sci-fi elements, it made a bit more sense, I guess. I don't know, I still feel like they could have gotten the same effect with a song that fit in with the rest of the soundtrack better. Set in 2015, the main protagonist is Emma, an 11-year-old girl living in Gracefield House, an orphanage housing her and 37 other children, 2 of those kids being her best friends and the other protagonists, Norman and Ray. All of them live a happy life day to day, playing games, eating good food, sleeping in comfortable plush beds, and being given everything they've ever wanted without a care in the world. Emma is very insistent that there's no better life than the one that they have at the house, but everyone else is curious about what life is like outside of their orphanage. Emma is of the opinion that it's for their safety, since they don't know what lies outside the walls of their home, but there's no reason to leave when they have such a perfect life already. Boy, does she change her tune quickly. Emma is cheerful, upbeat, energetic, and ripe for the picking for a break the cutie moment somewhere down the line. I liked her though, and it's interesting to see a female main character in a shonen series at all, especially written in this way. Usually the peppy happy characters are somewhat klutzy or dumb, or border on being completely unable to function, which is a big mood. But this was a nice change. She seems mature for her age despite her bubbly energy, and has a layer of intelligence hidden underneath what people see as a ditzy personality. Norman, the soft-spoken white-haired anime boy who acts like literally every other white-haired anime boy since the birth of Japanese animation, is in many ways a foil to Emma. He's a lot more reserved, level-headed, mature, and able to keep his emotions in check, as well as being able to catch on to things that Emma misses due to being somewhat naive at times. We learn over the course of the series that the bond between him and Emma has always been strong, and it's her enthusiasm and hope that sways him from viewing things too pessimistically. He cares for her deeply, to the point that the idea of making her cry makes him reconsider his entire worldview at times. Lastly, we have Ray, and what an interesting character to say the least. My first impression of him was edgy emo boy. And to my utter shock, I was proven absolutely right. Much like Norman, he's highly intelligent and observant, and seems to have a knack for technology, which is discussed in dialogue but never really shown on camera, except for him making a device later off-screen, I guess. I don't know. Whilst Emma can usually appeal to Norman's emotional side, Ray often has his misgivings, and seems to be able to detach himself from situations and people if he feels that Emma's often wild and impulsive ideals don't make any logical sense. It's established early on that the three main characters are meant to be prodigies, and amongst the most popular. They're held up on a pedestal not just by the other kids, but by the adult taking care of them all, Isabella. Throughout the first episode, I got the vibe that there was an overwhelming need for everyone at the orphanage to one-up each other. They have to be the best of the best, they have to get the best exam scores, and you have to be smart or athletic or strategic, or have some kind of talent that makes you special. That contributes something rather than having no talent whatsoever and being seen as a hindrance. They're competing with each other, and I was quick to catch on that it's not simply childish pride that's driving them to act this way. We find out through exposition that the only time that the children are given permission to leave is when they're escorted out after being adopted by a foster family. Every adopted child that's left the house has done so before or at the age of 12 and has never remained in contact with the rest of the children. It's almost like they vanished to never be seen again. By the end of episode 1, Connie, the sickly, talentless child that wasn't smart and couldn't run very fast, has now been adopted. And Emma and Norman find out not too long after why these children never write letters or stay in touch with their family back at the house. They're not an orphanage of parentless kids waiting to find their forever home, but instead cattle, being farmed as high-grade meat for the demon creatures that are in charge of this world. And this event jump-starts the rest of the season's plot. Escape this place, no matter what, and make sure that every child makes it out alive. So, I was not expecting this to spiral down so quickly. The introduction to the happy scenic life and its inevitable end was revealed in the first 22 minutes of the show. Sure, I was expecting a twist to form, but I thought they'd wait until at least halfway through the show, a few episodes in, or maybe even at the end of the season. However, they certainly didn't beat around the bush, which I guess makes sense for what only has 12 episodes out so far, but still. There might have been a slightly bigger impact if we'd gotten to know these characters a bit better prior to the morbid twist. The main obstacle keeping them from freedom is their mama, Isabella, a woman who fronts as a warm, loving caretaker of all these kids, but in actuality is ruthlessly cruel, and happens to be working with the demonic monsters to make sure that they get hand-delivered their next meal. Isabella isn't afraid of punishing the ones that she holds dear if they go against her, but also has the advantage of every other child's unquestioned trust. She holds power over all these kids, and Emma, Norman and Ray live in absolute terror of her getting the jump on them, or finding out what their plans are. The mind games, twists and turns can often keep you guessing. How much does Isabella know? How high are the stakes? It makes you want to keep watching just to find out if these kids will make it out alright, and how they're going to set about doing that. So we've introduced the heroes and the main antagonists. Let's introduce the secondary main characters. Honestly, this will probably be a good lead-in into some of the glaring issues I have with this show. So, We have Dawn, somewhat of a hothead, but has a good heart and seems reliable and amicable. And Gilda, a shy, gentle girl with glasses. They play a pretty big role in the series, being two of the only kids the main trio tell the grim truth to in the beginning, but there isn't too much to say about them really. That's the unfortunate thing about this show. There's potential for development for these characters, but they don't really have time to flesh them all out. They do have some scenes alone, which I guess could constitute as development, but you don't really learn much about them, even if they're actively learning more about what's really going on in this hellish orphanage. Then there's Sister Krona, introduced at the end of the second episode, and yeah, I'm aware of the elephant in the room, but Lobster Magnet's review did a much better job of covering the topic, link in the description below. So I'm going to dodge any of that talk and focus on her as a character, plain and simple. Sister Krona is introduced early on to act as another caretaker over these children. Despite this, however, she doesn't have the same privileges as someone in Isabella's role, and it's revealed that Krona is attempting to undermine her, even going so far as to let the kids know that she's aware of their escape plan and wants to help them, as the potential of high-grade meat getting right out under Isabella's nose would be a massive blow. There was a lot of potential with this character. Although she oftentimes bordered on the unhinged and definitely terrifying, she has a theatrical and flamboyant energy that makes her very interesting to watch, and her subsequent death only a few episodes later was, in my opinion, wasted potential. I would have loved to have seen more of her working with the children, maybe even going with them, but plot conveniences made that an impossibility from the get-go. Krona essentially stole the show for me, and I'm sad she got so little time and attention devoted to her. And now this is where I get into some potentially controversial territory. Throughout the show, there's a lot of discussion back and forth between characters, bouncing ideas off each other, relating observations they've made to each other, but in a lot of cases, instead of having internal monologues or being in a place where they know they wouldn't be overheard, they love talking about what should be covert plans very loudly in the middle of a public space where everyone can hear them. There's even a scene where Emma talks to herself like a crazy person in front of another kid who isn't in on what's going on yet. If you're acting weird, a kid who's worried is going to run to Isabella immediately and let her know you're acting weird since she's the mother figure to all of them, and therefore put the plan and all the children in jeopardy. No wonder these kids become so worried about an informant potentially amongst them. You don't make it difficult for them. Oh yeah, by the way, that's a thing. They suspect that someone is relaying information back to Isabella, judging on how she always seems to know things that she wouldn't be able to without being explicitly told. The show sets it up for you to think, oh shoot, who's the one who betrayed them? Maybe it's Gilda. Maybe it's Dawn. But I actually found out the twist before the big reveal through a few subtle context clues.
You were behind all this?
Yes, it was I. My machinations lay undetected for years, for I'm a master of deception.
So yeah, turns out Ray is a big damn traitor. Or is he? No, as it turns out, he was ratting them out for the sake of their protection. 'Cause you know, if Isabella felt Ray was on her side, then that would draw suspicion away from him and therefore them. Okay, but the glaring issue with that is, if you're going to actively tell an enemy what your friends are attempting to do, that kind of puts them in danger, so I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to get at here, Ray. You could have very well kept her in the dark about it a little more than you chose to. And hell, since he tells his mama who the kids at the gate were that accidentally left little Bunny behind, he shoots himself in the foot because she very rightfully asks him, well, why didn't you stop them then, dumbass? Revealing that he's a double agent. Okay, I get what they're going for. The twist in and of itself is a good one in theory, I mean that, but I think it would have been a much better twist if this kid had stuck to his guns about one issue or the other, rather than flip-flopping back and forth between, I'm selfish, I want to live, actually, I'm not selfish and I want you guys to live, I don't want everyone to come with us, but then I actually do want everyone to come with us, I don't give a shit about you, Norman, wait, I actually do, come back! Making him completely loyal to Isabella would have been much more interesting and understandable in what we find out later about his and her relationship, but instead we're left with a character motivation that doesn't make sense compared to his actions. He's planned an escape for years and yet spills the beans about it when it finally comes about. What the hell? Either way, it's very liberating to see Emma lose her shit with him even for a brief second. Glad to know that some people in the canon of the show can see how stupid that was. The thing about The Promised Neverland is it had a lot of potential to be better than it is. It could have been a show that would be remembered as one of the legendary hits that people haven't stopped talking about to this day. But 6 months have passed since it finished airing its first season, and I barely see anyone talking about it anymore. It's disappointing because it had a lot going for it in terms of visuals, soundtrack, character writing, and the initial premise is excellent and engaging. The cat and mouse chase and scenes where the kids have to sneak around as to not get caught can have you on the edge of your seat. They do know how to build tension and keep you watching to see what happens next. But at times, plot points are contrived and confusing, extremely predictable, or sometimes downright ridiculous. I mean, Ray knew about the monster's existence all this time because he has memories from being in the womb? Are you kidding me? You want these kids to succeed. You end up caring about their struggle, and the final episode of the first season actually had me hyped as fuck. And it threw a couple of twists I legitimately didn't see coming. My final verdict? It's good, but it's not fantastic. I expected a little more from what was the most popular anime of early 2019, and I don't feel it deserves a massive amount of hype that it got. It could have been one of the greats, but from where I'm standing, it's a show with real potential that unfortunately didn't quite make the cut. Has it made me want to watch the second season? Maybe. Maybe I'll just read the manga instead of waiting around to see where it goes from here.